My name is Emily Carter, and I was 17 years old the day everything started to change. I stood quietly next to the casket in our small living room in Roanoke, Virginia, staring at the lifeless face of the only mother I had ever known. Susan Carter. The woman who took me in when I was just a child, who brushed my hair with soft hands and whispered stories to me when I couldn't sleep. Now she lay there, surrounded by fading flowers and uncomfortable silence. The house was too quiet for a funeral. There were no sobs, no wails of grief, just the creaking of the old wooden floor beneath the cautious footsteps of distant relatives and neighbors who didn't know what to say. My adoptive father, Richard, stood stiffly in the corner, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his eyes darting between people as if expecting someone to accuse him of something. I watched him, uncertain. His presence made me uneasy. It always had, but today the discomfort had deepened into something heavier. My younger siblings, Noah and Lily, stood on opposite sides of the room, avoiding both eye contact and proximity. Lily, only 12, had her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. Not anymore. She had stopped crying the moment we left the hospital 3 days ago. Noah, 15 and already taller than me, leaned against the wall with his jaw tight, arms folded, and a look I couldn't decipher. I tried to meet his eyes, just to share the weight of this moment, but he looked away. We should have been holding each other. We should have been united in grief. But instead, there was this strange, brittle distance between us, like invisible walls had been hastily built the moment Susan died. And I felt it in my bones, something was wrong. Something more than death. A tension so thick it made breathing feel like a task. We weren't mourning as a family. We were each grieving alone. I reached out and touched the casket. Cold, hardwood beneath my fingertips. I wished it were her hand. I wished I could hear her voice one more time, tell her I wasn't ready, that I didn't know how to hold this family together, or even if I could. I had never felt more alone than I did in that moment, standing beside the woman who once made me feel safe. From behind me, I heard the sound of someone approaching, slow, hesitant steps. I turned slightly and saw Richard walking toward the casket. He moved like he was being forced, as though each step was a punishment. He stopped next to me, his presence cold, his face unreadable. He didn't look at me, or at Susan. He just stood there. "I'll say goodbye," he muttered, and leaned down slightly, placing a hand on the edge of the casket. I waited, hoping for sincerity, some sign that he was hurting too. That maybe, despite everything, he had loved her in his own way. But there was nothing. No emotion, no words of love, just a strange tightness in his jaw. When he turned away, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, fear, maybe? Guilt? I couldn't tell. But it lodged itself in my chest like a splinter I couldn't ignore. Lily wandered over a few minutes later and slipped her hand into mine. Her grip was weak, almost unsure, like she wasn't sure I'd still want her touch. I squeezed gently. "She wouldn't want us to fall apart," I whispered. Lily looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Then why does it feel like we already have?" I had no answer. Only silence. The service dragged on. People spoke in hushed voices, offered their condolences, brought food we didn't want. Richard barely moved, his face a stone mask. Noah disappeared for a while and came back with his hoodie pulled over his head, face darkened with something I didn't understand. We were like actors in a play none of us wanted to perform, reading lines from a script that didn't feel real. By the time the last guest left and the sun dipped below the hills of Roanoke, the house felt like a shell. Susan's presence had always been the warmth in these walls, the light that made this old place feel like home. Now, all I could feel was cold. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last thing Susan had said to me. It had been at the hospital, just before the machines were turned off. Her voice had been so faint I could barely hear her. "Take care of them, Em," she'd whispered. "And take care of yourself." At the time, I thought it was just a mother's goodbye. But now I wasn't so sure. Something didn't feel right. Not just in the house, not just in the way Richard barely looked at us, or how my siblings avoided speaking. It was something deeper, something buried. A secret maybe. A lie. And I could feel it growing, like a storm gathering far away, still invisible but coming all the same. Something was wrong. And I had no idea how much worse it was going to get. The day of the burial arrived under a sky the color of old ash. The wind moved through the trees like it knew something we didn't, brushing against my skin with a chill that made me shiver despite the summer air. We gathered at the small cemetery just outside of town, on a hill overlooking the river. It was quiet, too quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I stood beside Lily again, holding her hand, but my eyes kept flicking to Richard. He had been silent all morning. No words, no glances. He moved like a machine, performing each task with robotic precision, signing papers, nodding to the funeral director, helping the workers lower the casket. But I noticed the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. And I noticed something else: he wouldn't look at Susan. Not directly. Not even once. As the priest began his final words, Richard stepped forward slowly. It was supposed to be a moment of farewell, a private pause before the casket was lowered for good. He leaned down, closer than before, his hand resting gently on the edge. Then he did something strange. He leaned in even further, his lips barely an inch from Susan's still face, and whispered something I couldn't hear. I frowned, watching him carefully. He lingered there, too long. When he finally straightened up, everything changed. Richard's face turned pale. Not just pale, white, ghostly, like all the blood had drained out at once. His body trembled. His eyes widened, unfocused, and then he staggered back from the casket as if something had physically shoved him. A few people gasped. The priest stopped mid-sentence. Noah took a step forward, confused. But it was me who stared hardest. Something had happened in that moment. I couldn't explain how I knew it, but I did. That whisper, it wasn't just a farewell. Susan had said something. Something only he could hear. And whatever it was, it had terrified him. Richard didn't speak. He turned on his heel and walked away from the grave, leaving the priest and everyone else speechless. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. What was that? Lily asked beside me, her voice a fragile thread. I didn't answer. My heart was racing. I kept my eyes on Richard as he reached the car and leaned heavily against the door. His shoulders were shaking, but whether from anger or fear, I couldn't tell. After the burial, back at the house, the atmosphere was different. Thicker, heavier. Richard disappeared into his office and didn't come out for hours. The three of us, me, Noah, and Lily, sat in the living room without speaking. The television was off. No one touched the food. The silence was oppressive. Noah finally broke it. Did you see him? At the cemetery? I nodded. What the hell happened to him? I think, I said slowly, she told him something. Before she died. She was dead, Emily, he snapped, frustration bubbling up. You saw her. She didn't say anything. No, I said. Before she died at the hospital. Maybe she told him something then. Or left him a message. Noah didn't respond, but I could tell the thought had taken root. We both looked toward the hallway where Richard's office door remained shut. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of Susan's room. Everything was exactly how she'd left it. Her nightgown still draped over the chair, her favorite book on the nightstand. I stepped inside, moving slowly, as if she might return at any moment. I touched the edge of her vanity, ran my fingers over the old brush still holding strands of her hair. I knelt by the bed and whispered, "What did you say to him?" I knew she couldn't answer. But I also knew she'd said something. Something important. Something powerful enough to shake Richard to his core. I just had no idea what it was. And I had no idea how much it was going to change everything. 3 days after the burial, the air in the house shifted again. Not in the way a storm shifts the wind, but in the quiet, deliberate way that a sealed envelope carries a weight far beyond its paper and ink. That morning, a letter arrived. Not addressed to me, but to Richard. The handwriting was formal, unfamiliar. When he opened it, his expression darkened, and he said nothing as he passed it to me. Inside was a brief message from the family attorney, Mr. Alton Green, requesting our presence at his office later that afternoon for the reading of Susan's will. By 3 o'clock, we were seated in a cramped waiting room filled with the smell of old carpet and lemon polish. Noah sat with his arms crossed, legs stretched out, bouncing one knee. Lily clutched a worn stuffed rabbit Susan had given her, its fur faded from years of love. Richard sat apart from us, staring at the wall, jaw clenched tight. He hadn't said a word during the drive. The silence between us had never been so loud. Mr. Green finally appeared, a thin man with silver-rimmed glasses and a voice like dry leaves rustling. He gestured for us to follow him into his office. The walls were lined with dusty law books and framed certificates, and the large mahogany desk at the center seemed too big for the room. We sat down, and he cleared his throat before beginning. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice grave. "This is never an easy moment, but your mother, Susan Carter, was very clear in her final wishes." What I'm about to read was signed and witnessed 1 week before her passing. I felt Lily's hand find mine under the table. My heart beat louder in my ears as Mr. Green unfolded the document. "To my beloved children, Emily, Noah, and Lily, my home, my car, and the entirety of my personal estate are to be transferred equally and jointly into your names. These assets are to be managed by a legal trustee until each of you reaches legal age, unless circumstances require otherwise. The decision is final." He paused. "To my husband, Richard Carter, I leave no financial inheritance. I trust he will understand why." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. I turned my head slowly toward Richard. His face didn't twitch, didn't change. But his hands were a different story. They were clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles turned the color of snow. For a moment, I thought he might explode. But he didn't. He simply nodded once, then looked away from us entirely, eyes fixed on a spot behind Mr. Green's shoulder. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The decision felt deliberate. Precise. Susan hadn't just left him out, she had cut him out with surgical care. And the words "I trust you will understand why" echoed in my mind like a warning bell. Noah sat up straighter. "Wait," he said, his voice tight. "Everything? Even the house?" "Yes," Mr. Green replied, glancing over his glasses. "The title has already been updated. It is now held in a protective trust for the three of you." Lily looked at me, her eyes wide. "Does that mean we don't have to leave?" Mr. Green gave a small nod. "That's correct." It should have been a relief. A blessing. But the weight in the room said otherwise. I could feel the heat radiating from Richard. Like a coiled snake ready to strike. He stood suddenly, the movement abrupt enough to make Lily flinch. "We're done here," he said coldly. "Mr. Carter," Mr. Green began, but Richard was already moving toward the door. He didn't look back at us. Didn't say a word. Back at home, the tension only grew. Richard didn't speak to any of us. He barely acknowledged our presence, moving through the house like a ghost. But there was nothing passive about his silence. It was the silence of calculation, of resentment quietly fermenting into something more dangerous. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, the will still echoing in my thoughts. Why had Susan done it? What did she know that made her believe this was the only way to protect us? And why did Richard look like a man who'd just lost everything he thought was already his? As I listened to the creaks and groans of the house settling in tonight, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by ghosts or spirits, but by the eyes of a man whose plans had just unraveled. And I feared what he might do to try and piece them back together. I had never been the type to snoop. Susan raised me to be respectful, to knock before entering, to ask before touching what wasn't mine. But things were different now. The rules had changed the moment she died. And whatever peace we might have hoped for after the will was read, it shattered within 24 hours. Richard's mood shifted from silent to simmering. He stalked through the house with clipped steps, muttered to himself in dark corners, and slammed doors with just enough force to make us jump. He still hadn't spoken a word to any of us. But the silence wasn't empty. It was a threat, wrapped in waiting. I was passing by his office late one afternoon when I heard the sound of something being shoved roughly into a drawer. I froze. Through the crack in the door, I could see Richard's back, hunched and tense. He cursed under his breath, something sharp and bitter, then stormed out of the room without noticing me. The door creaked open behind him. I stood there for a long moment, the hairs on my arms standing up. Then I pushed the door open and stepped inside. His office had always been a place of cold order. Everything in place. Pens lined up perfectly. Books alphabetized. Not a single frame out of line. But that day, the desk was a mess, papers scattered, folders left open, drawers half shut. Something had happened. Or was about to. My eyes fell on a thick black folder poking out from beneath a stack of bills. I hesitated for only a second before pulling it free and flipping it open. Inside was a collection of documents, some official, some personal. I scanned the first few pages and felt the breath catch in my throat. Real estate inquiries. A signed contract, incomplete, for the sale of our house. Printed emails between Richard and the state-run transitional housing program for minors. A typed application to enroll me in a state facility for displaced youth. My hands trembled as I read through message after message. They weren't recent. Most were dated weeks before Susan died. He had been preparing everything, had started this plan long before she was gone. He never intended to raise us. He intended to ship me away, split us apart, sell the house, and disappear. One note, scrawled in his handwriting, chilled me more than anything. Once she's gone, the rest will follow quickly. The girl turns 18 soon, she won't matter by then. I sank to the floor, folder in my lap, unable to move. He had waited for her to die. Maybe even counted the days. I wasn't just in the way. I was an obstacle. Beneath the emails and contracts, I found something else, something older. A short message, printed on Susan's stationery, clipped to a sealed envelope addressed to Mr. Green. My fingers hovered over it before opening the clip. The message wasn't long. It was handwritten, in Susan's small, neat print. If you're reading this, I found the folder. I know what he's planning. I'm rewriting my will today. This is not a man who should raise children. Please protect them. Do whatever you must. There it was. Proof. Confirmation. Susan had known. Somehow, she had discovered everything. And she hadn't just changed the will, she'd left a paper trail. A final act of protection. I slipped the folder under my shirt and crept out of the office, heart pounding. In my room, I locked the door and hid the folder beneath the loose floorboard under my bed, the same place where I had once hidden birthday gifts and my first diary. But this wasn't childhood anymore. This was war. That night at dinner, Richard finally spoke. We need to talk, he said, sitting down across from us with a forced calm that made my skin crawl. No one answered. I've been thinking, he went on, about what's best for everyone. This house is too much. Too many memories. Too many responsibilities. It would make sense to sell it. No, I said immediately, my voice steady. He looked at me with a hard smile. It's not really your decision. It is now, I replied, watching his face. His smile vanished. I met his gaze and didn't flinch. We know about the will. We know what Mom wanted. Lily put down her fork. Noah sat still, his eyes flicking between us. Richard leaned back in his chair. You're a child, Emily. You don't understand how the world works. I've taken care of this family for years. You don't get to make the decisions. I think Mom knew exactly who should, I said quietly. He said nothing after that. Just stood and walked away. But I knew then, this wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, I returned to the hidden folder as soon as the house was quiet. I waited until Richard had left. He said he was going to clear his head, but I knew better than to believe he just needed air. I told Noah and Lily to stay in their rooms and locked my door behind me. With the floorboard pulled up, the folder rested in my lap again, heavier than before. My fingers moved quickly, thumbing past the pages I had already read, searching for something I wasn't even sure existed. Then I saw it. Tucked into the back, behind a stack of medical forms and printed email chains, was a pale blue envelope sealed with tape instead of glue. On the front, in Susan's handwriting, were the words, "For Alton Green. If anything happens to me." My breath caught. I opened it carefully, afraid that even the slightest tear might damage what could be the only truth left in this mess. Inside was a handwritten letter on Susan's personal stationery, the familiar floral pattern in the corners unmistakably hers. I unfolded the pages and began to read, her voice rising in my memory with every line. "Alton, if this reaches you, then I've either passed or something's gone terribly wrong. I don't have much time to explain everything, but I need you to understand why I made the changes I did to my will. Richard has been planning something. I found documents in his drawer. At first, I thought maybe I was misinterpreting things, emails about property listings, inquiries about youth programs for displaced children. I confronted him once, casually, and he brushed it off. But I've been with him long enough to recognize when he's lying. And he was. About everything. I began to suspect that his affection for the children wasn't real. He treats Emily like a burden. Noah like a tool. Lily like she's invisible. I think he married me for the house, for the benefits, for what I could offer him. And now that I'm sick, now that he knows I won't be here much longer, he's been preparing for what comes next. He wants to sell everything. Get rid of the kids. Erase all of it. I felt my chest tighten. I kept reading, her voice getting sharper, more urgent in my mind. That's why I changed the will. I know it won't stop him entirely. I know he'll try something. But this gives the kids a chance. Emily is strong. She's smart. She has more heart than he'll ever understand. I trust her to keep them safe. I'm not doing this out of paranoia. I'm doing it out of instinct. Out of love. I see what he's become, and it terrifies me. Please, Alton, make sure they're protected. Make sure my decision holds. He doesn't see them as his children. He never did. I stared at the final line for a long time. The words were etched with finality, not anger but certainty. Susan had known exactly who Richard was, and more importantly, who he wasn't. There was a postscript, hastily written. If he challenges the will, use this letter. Use whatever you must. Just don't let him win. I read it 3 more times before placing it back inside the folder. Every word confirmed what I had begun to fear since the funeral. Susan had fought to protect us with her final breath. And now it was my turn to continue that fight. I took the letter straight to Mr. Green. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up at his office, folder clutched in my arms like a shield. When I placed it on his desk and handed him the letter, I saw his expression shift from curiosity to concern. He read the entire thing in silence. When he looked up, his eyes met mine with a grave understanding. "This changes everything," he said. "I need to protect my siblings," I told him. "I don't trust him. Not anymore." "You have every reason not to," he replied. "This letter gives us leverage. If Richard tries anything, legally or otherwise, we can push back." "I think he's already planning something," I said. "Then we'll be ready." We discussed legal options. Trust protections. Emergency guardianship. Even the possibility of starting emancipation proceedings if things got worse. Mr. Green promised to file a protective notice with the probate court, locking down any major decisions regarding the estate. I left his office with my heart pounding but my steps steadier. I wasn't powerless. When I got home, Richard was waiting in the kitchen. He didn't smile. "Where were you?" he asked, voice like ice. I met his gaze. With Mr. Green. We had some paperwork to go over. His eyes narrowed. What kind of paperwork? Mom's paperwork, I said. Important stuff. He didn't push further. Just stood there, studying me like someone trying to figure out how strong the walls of a locked door might be before kicking it down. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with the letter in my hand and a plan forming in my mind. I knew who Richard was now. I knew what he wanted. But I also knew who I was. And I wasn't going to let him win. The shift didn't come quietly. It started with small things, subtle, poisonous changes in Richard's behavior. A missing key here, a locked cabinet there. The rules began to shift overnight. Curfews that never existed were suddenly enforced. Lily wasn't allowed to sleep with the hallway light on. Noah was told he couldn't visit friends unless Richard approved every detail. And me? I became the enemy in my own home. After my visit to Mr. Green, Richard no longer pretended to be civil. He didn't bother hiding his resentment. Every time he looked at me, it was with the simmering gaze of someone who had lost control and was desperate to reclaim it. He didn't raise his voice, not yet, but the way he hovered over me during meals or lingered in the hallway after I left a room told me everything I needed to know. The first real confrontation happened on a rainy Thursday. I was in the kitchen helping Lily with homework when Richard walked in and dropped a folder onto the table. Inside were real estate flyers and printed photos of our house, exterior shots, interior images from old listings. He had already scheduled appraisals. We need to sell, he said flatly. No, I replied, calmly but firmly. We're not selling. Mom's will, I don't give a damn about the will, he snapped, cutting me off. That house is too much for 3 kids to maintain. You're not equipped for this, Emily. It's not your decision to make. He leaned across the table, his face inches from mine. I raised you. I've kept this roof over your head. You think some papers and signatures give you the right to ignore me? Lily started crying. I stood up between them, shielding her. Don't talk to me like I'm nothing, I said. And don't ever talk to her like this again. He pulled back, nostrils flaring, and left the room. The next day, our internet was mysteriously disconnected. Then the groceries stopped appearing. He claimed there wasn't money for it anymore. I checked the bank account Susan had set up for the house expenses. Empty. That night, I stayed up searching for financial paperwork. Susan had mentioned accounts, savings, protections, but I needed details. With a flashlight and a notebook, I combed through her file cabinet. And I found it. A separate account, opened in her name just 6 months before she died, marked Trust Emergency Fund. The balance wasn't massive, but it was enough to cover several months of bills and food. I contacted Mr. Green, and within a day, he transferred control of that account to the legal trustee managing our estate. I was named as its primary contact. Richard was furious. He stormed into my room that evening, slamming the door behind him. You think this makes you powerful? He hissed. I think it makes me responsible. He pointed at me, trembling with rage. You're ruining this family. No, I said quietly, you already did. From that night on, the walls of the house began to close in. He started cornering Noah when I wasn't around, feeding him twisted ideas. Telling him I was trying to control everything. That I was planning to cut him and Lily out. I watched my brother's eyes grow more distant each day, the doubt setting in like a virus. It worked. Noah started arguing with me, refusing to follow even basic rules we agreed on together. When I showed him the letter from Susan, he refused to read it. That's just your version, he said coldly. You're making all the decisions now. Who made you queen? Lily, meanwhile, was wilting. She stopped eating full meals. She flinched at loud sounds. She slept with the light on in my room most nights, curled up beside me like she used to when she was 5. I knew I couldn't let this go on. I met with Mr. Green again and told him everything about Richard's threats, the manipulation, the financial sabotage. He agreed it was time to escalate. He filed a motion for emergency legal review, citing the will, Susan's letter, and my recent findings. If he tries to remove you or force a sale, Mr. Green said, he'll have to answer in court. But Richard didn't wait for court. The next morning, he gathered us all in the living room and made a declaration. If you don't agree to sell this house, he said, pacing, I'll contact social services. They'll split you three up. You want that? You want to go live in separate homes with strangers? Because that's what'll happen. Noah looked down. Lily started crying again. And I stood up. You do that, I said. And I'll bring everything I have to court. Mom's letter. Her will. The lawyer. The trust. Everything. He glared at me. You can't win, Emily. I didn't blink. I already am. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battlefield. Every step I took echoed with tension, every corner seemed to hide another threat. Richard was still here, still pretending to have control. But something had shifted, and he knew it. I was no longer just a girl under his roof, I was becoming something he hadn't expected. I was fighting back, and worse for him, I had the law on my side. The morning after his threat to call social services, I met with Mr. Green in his office. The smell of dust and coffee had become oddly comforting, like it was the only place where logic still existed. He had already begun the process for my emancipation. It wasn't simple, but I had everything we needed, Susan's written letter, the will, the trust account access, and now documented threats from Richard. You understand what this means? He asked, pushing a pen toward me. You'll be legally responsible for your own life. Finances, decisions, protection. You'll also be recognized as the trustee's partner in protecting Lily and Noah, as long as you stay in that house. I didn't hesitate. I signed the papers. By the end of the week, the court had scheduled a preliminary hearing. Until then, Mr. Green filed for temporary legal safeguards around the estate. It meant Richard couldn't sell the house, access funds, or make binding decisions involving me or the others. He wasn't told everything yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. With that small legal shield in place, I turned my focus to survival. Real survival. I started by going through Susan's personal accounts. Her budgeting records were meticulous. I found bank statements, property tax notes, even handwritten savings goals for each of us. There were tabs labeled Emily's education, Lily's emergency, Noah's college. She had planned everything. I moved quickly. I contacted the trust bank and had all relevant funds shifted into protected subaccounts under the estate manager's name. That way, even if Richard got clever, he couldn't reach them. I set up grocery deliveries, paid off overdue utility bills, and ensured the house insurance was renewed. Bit by bit, I took the wheel. The hardest part wasn't the money, it was Noah. He was slipping away from me. We barely spoke anymore. When we did, it turned into an argument. He spent more time in Richard's presence, listening to his poison, repeating the same twisted logic, you're controlling everything. You want the house for yourself. You never listen to what I want. He accused me of manipulating Lily. Of pretending to be the hero. I tried to explain. I showed him the papers, the documents, even read parts of Susan's letter aloud. But his eyes didn't soften. You think she was perfect, he said one night, standing in the hallway outside his room. But she was. Just afraid. She never trusted Dad, and now you don't either. He's not our dad, Noah, I replied. He never was. You don't get to decide that. He slammed his door, and I stood there with the weight of his words pressing down on me. Lily was the only one still by my side. She followed me from room to room like a shadow. She wouldn't sleep alone anymore. Her anxiety had worsened, shortness of breath, quiet panic attacks in the middle of the night. I found her one morning in the bathroom, curled on the tile, crying because Richard had yelled at her for leaving a light on. I wrapped her in a blanket and stayed with her until she fell asleep in my lap. I scheduled a session with a counselor from school. I didn't tell Richard. I used the trust funds. Lily deserved more than fear. That afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself, really looked. My face was thinner, my eyes darker with sleepless nights. But behind all that, I saw something harder. I wasn't a child anymore. I was becoming something else. Susan had known this would happen. She had seen it coming. She had placed her trust in me, and now I was holding a family together with threads and stubborn will. Richard grew more desperate. He began patrolling the house like a warden. He locked his office. He checked the mail before we could. He even cut the phone line in the living room, as if that would stop me from making calls. But it didn't matter anymore. I had what I needed. And he was running out of time. The hearing for my emancipation was set for the following Tuesday. Until then, I had one job: keep Lily safe. And, if possible, try to reach Noah again. But Richard? He wasn't hiding anymore. He was watching. And I could feel it every second of every day. The hearing was just a few days away, but the weight of each hour felt heavier than the last. I had built walls, drawn lines, fortified every legal and financial aspect I could. I thought I had anticipated every move Richard might make. But I hadn't expected the next betrayal to come from inside the one place I was still trying to protect, from Noah. It began with small shifts. Noah stopped eating meals with us. He spent more time in the garage, doors locked, windows shut. His phone was always in his hand, his voice low during calls I wasn't allowed to overhear. When I tried to talk to him, he barely responded. One night, I found Lily sitting alone on the stairs, her knees pulled to her chest. He said, "You want to keep everything for yourself," she whispered. My breath caught. Noah? She nodded. He said, "You just want the house and the money. That you don't care what he wants." I sat down beside her, my heart pounding. That's not true, Lil. You know it's not. Everything I've done, it's for us. For you. For him too, even if he can't see it. I believe you, she whispered, leaning into me. But he doesn't anymore. Later that night, I confronted him. He was in his room, headphones on, music blaring loud enough that I had to knock twice. When he opened the door, his face was blank. "We need to talk," I said. "No," he replied. "You need to listen for once." He stepped aside just enough to let me in. The room was a mess, unusual for him. Papers scattered, a backpack half-zipped, one of Richard's old binders open on the desk. "What's going on, Noah?" "I'm done pretending you're in charge," he said. "You've made all the decisions. You never asked what I wanted. You just marched into court and acted like you know what's best." "I'm trying to keep us together," I said. "Richard wanted to sell the house and split us up. You saw the documents. I saw your version of everything. I saw what you wanted me to see." My jaw tightened. "You think I'm lying? I think you're selfish. You want to play savior, but you're just trying to be mom. And you're not her." That cut deeper than I expected. I stared at him for a long moment. "What did he say to you?" He didn't answer. "Noah, what did Richard say?" He crossed his arms. "He said I have rights too. That you can't just take over and ignore me." "And you believe him?" "I believe you're not telling me everything." I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned away, afraid of what I might say if I stayed. But the next morning, it got worse. Mr. Green called me. "Emily, we've got a problem." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Richard filed an emergency petition. He's using Noah's testimony. Says you're manipulating the trust, isolating your siblings, and financially overreaching. Claims you're mentally unfit to be the estate contact." I sat down, the phone pressed tightly to my ear. "He used Noah?" "Yes. We have counterproof, but it complicates things. The judge might see it as a sibling dispute. It weakens your position. I hung up and went straight to Noah. He didn't deny it. I'm just trying to make sure I get a say, he said flatly. By helping him take everything? You took everything first. I felt my heart crack. I didn't cry. I couldn't. That night, I found Lily crying in the closet. He yelled at me, she sobbed. He said I'm just a kid and I should stop acting like I know anything. I wrapped my arms around her and held her close. I wanted to protect her from everything, from Richard, from Noah, from the collapsing walls of our family. But I couldn't protect her from betrayal. I wrote a statement for the court. I included Susan's letter, the trust documents, the financial breakdown, and a description of the escalating threats. I didn't include Noah's name. I couldn't. I still hoped he'd come back. But by then, the house was no longer divided. It was broken. And I was standing in the middle, trying to hold together pieces that no longer fit. The rain came that night, soft at first, then stronger, as if the sky itself was mourning what our family had become. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of it, and I stayed awake listening to the rhythmic patter against the windows, thinking about everything that had fractured between me and Noah. I no longer knew how to reach him. I didn't know if I should try. The next morning, while Lily was at a counseling session, I found myself wandering the upstairs hallway aimlessly. I hadn't entered Susan's bedroom in weeks, not since the day I found the folder in Richard's office. But something pulled me there now, a whisper of instinct, the same one that had warned me at the funeral, that had guided me through every discovery since. I stepped inside, breathing in the faded scent of her lavender lotion and the dust that had settled over time. The bed was still made, perfectly untouched. The books on her nightstand hadn't moved. But it wasn't the bedroom that drew my attention. It was the ceiling. The attic. The entrance was tucked behind a narrow hallway door. I pulled it open and climbed the old wooden ladder slowly, feeling each run flex under my weight. The air grew colder as I reached the top, the smell of insulation and wood thick around me. The attic was dark except for one window, where light filtered through just enough to reveal the chaos of old boxes and forgotten furniture. I didn't know what I was looking for. But I knew I had to keep looking. I opened the first box. Nothing, old clothes, high school yearbooks. The second was full of books, most of them Susan's from college. And then the third box caught my eye. It was marked in her handwriting, personal, do not discard. Inside was a red leather-bound journal. The pages were worn, the binding frayed at the edges. My hands trembled as I lifted it. I sat down on the floor and opened to the first page. March 4th, I don't know why I'm writing this, except that I feel like I need to say these things to someone, even if no one ever reads it. Richard has changed. Or maybe he was always like this and I just didn't want to see it. My chest tightened. I flipped forward. April 12th, Emily asked me today why Richard never helps with dinner. I didn't have an answer. I watched her set the table by herself while he sat in front of the TV like she was invisible. She's starting to notice. May 19th, I overheard him on the phone. He was talking about the house like it already belonged to him. He said, once she's out of the way, I can finally breathe. I don't think he knew I was home. The entries continued, months of reflections, doubts, and fears. Susan had written down everything. Her growing suspicion that Richard didn't love her, that he only stayed for what he could gain. Her heartbreak over the way he treated us. Her growing resolve to protect us, no matter what. And then came the final pages. August 2nd, I changed the will. I didn't tell him. I went to Alton in secret. If anything happens to me, I need to know they'll be safe. Especially Emily. She sees things clearly. I wish I had her courage. August 14th, the doctor said it's terminal. Weeks, maybe. I didn't tell the kids yet. I'm scared, but I feel peace knowing I've done what I could. Richard doesn't know about the new account. Or the letter. Or the trust. August 21st, I told Richard the first was updating paperwork. He smiled like it meant nothing. I wanted to scream. He's already planning his life without me. He doesn't know I've already taken him out of it. I closed the diary slowly, unable to breathe for a moment. She had seen it all. She had been 2 steps ahead even when dying. And she had left this for me, not intentionally, maybe, but as proof, as validation, as a mother's last warning. I took the journal and returned to my room, locking the door behind me. I placed it beside the letter I had already shared with Mr. Green. Together, they were undeniable. That evening, I confronted Richard. I found him in the kitchen, pretending to go through the mail. "I found Mom's journal," I said. He looked up, his eyes cold and unreadable. "She wrote everything. Every word, every lie, every threat. She knew what you were doing." He didn't move. "She heard you on the phone. She knew about your plans. She changed the will because of you. Still, nothing. You never loved her." His lips curled slightly. "She was naive." I stepped closer, the diary clutched tightly in my hand. "But I'm not." And then I turned and walked away. In that moment, I knew this was more than a legal fight. This was personal. And I wasn't going to lose. The day of the hearing arrived wrapped in gray skies and wind, as if the weather itself had sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold. I sat in the courthouse waiting room beside Mr. Green, the journal on my lap, the letter from Susan tucked safely inside my bag. Lily sat quietly beside me, holding my hand with a grip that hadn't loosened all morning. Noah was already inside, seated with Richard across the aisle, his expression blank. The courtroom wasn't large. It was the kind of place built more for civil disputes and small-town disagreements than the deep-rooted war we were about to expose. But to me, it felt as vast as a battlefield. The judge entered, a tall woman with a stern face and silver-streaked hair, and the room hushed immediately. "Case number 372, the clerk began. In the matter of Emily Carter petitioning for legal emancipation and trustee control, in opposition to Richard Carter's emergency motion for conservatorship review." The words rang through my ears like thunder. We began. Mr. Green stood first, presenting our case with the steady clarity I had come to depend on. He laid out Susan's will, the legal trust, and my role in stabilizing the household after her death. He introduced the handwritten letter, allowed the judge to read it silently, and described the pattern of manipulation, financial control, and emotional abuse Richard had exercised since Susan's passing. "She was dying," Mr. Green said. "And even in her final days, she made choices not out of impulse, but out of protection. Her final wishes are documented, legal, and sound. And this young woman," he motioned toward me, "has honored those wishes." Richard's lawyer countered with feigned concern. He spoke of stress, of overwhelmed emotions, and a teenager struggling to carry too much. Then Richard stood. His words were measured, his tone falsely tender. "I only want what's best for them," he said. "Emily has done well, but she's just a girl. She's not capable of managing a household, guiding 2 other minors, and handling complex legal responsibilities. My wife wasn't in her full mind when she changed the will. She was under medication, confused. This has gone too far." He glanced at the judge, trying to look sincere. "I loved my wife. I love these children. But they need an adult." I felt my stomach twist. Then the judge turned to me. "Miss Carter," she said. "Would you like to respond?" I stood slowly. My legs felt like lead, but I met her gaze. "I found the papers Richard didn't want anyone to see," I said. "The real estate contracts. The emails about sending me away, splitting us up. I found Susan's letter, written in her own hand, explaining why she made the changes she did. She was afraid for us. She knew who he really was." I took a deep breath and held up the red leather journal. This is Susan's diary. It spans over a year. In it, she documents Richard's behavior, his words, his plans. She describes her growing fear, her decision to change the will, and her hope that I would protect my siblings when she no longer could. The judge motioned for the journal. I handed it to the bailiff, and silence fell as the judge read the final entries. When she finished, she looked back at Richard. "Do you dispute this?" she asked. He didn't answer. "Mr. Carter?" His jaw twitched. She was emotional. Dying. She was lucid, the judge interrupted. She was specific. And her documents align with her testimony. Mr. Green stood again. "We also have a witness ready to testify regarding Richard's attempt to sell the house prior to Susan's death. We can provide timestamps, communications." The judge held up her hand. "I've heard enough." The courtroom fell silent again. She turned to me. "Miss Carter, based on the documentation provided, the testimony submitted, and the evidence presented, I am granting your request for legal emancipation. Furthermore, I am ruling in favor of maintaining the current estate trust, with you as the designated contact under the oversight of the court-appointed trustee." Richard's lawyer rose. "Your Honor, sit down." She turned to Richard one final time. "This court finds sufficient evidence of coercive behavior and attempted violation of testamentary intent. Your emergency petition is denied. Any further interference with the estate will result in legal consequences." Noah looked stunned. He stared at Richard, then at me. The judge's gavel struck. It was over. We left the courtroom in silence. Outside, the wind had stilled. The sky was beginning to clear. Mr. Green walked beside me, his hand light on my shoulder. "You did well," he said. "Susan would be proud." But my heart was heavy. Because even with the victory, I had lost something. And I didn't know if I'd ever get it back. The victory in court had settled the legal ground beneath our feet, but the emotional damage remained scattered in shards around me. Richard's grip on our lives had been severed, but the echo of his presence still lingered in every hallway, in every word left unsaid between me and Noah. I had won the battle, but it felt like I had lost a brother. 3 days after the hearing, Mr. Green called me back to his office. "I have something else," he said over the phone. "Susan left a second file with me. She instructed me to hold it until the court validated her will." I arrived before noon. The envelope was thick, sealed in wax, and marked in Susan's handwriting, to be delivered only if the truth is contested. Mr. Green handed it to me solemnly. "I haven't opened it," he said. "But if it's what I suspect, it could give Noah something he desperately needs." We opened it together. Inside was a single USB drive and a short handwritten note. "Alton, if he tries to undo what I've done, if he questions my sanity, or if my children are forced into a courtroom to defend themselves, show them this. Let them hear my voice. Let them see me, whole and clear. Not just words on a page. This is my final truth." Mr. Green plugged the drive into his laptop. The screen blinked once before a video loaded. Susan sat in the hospital bed, her hair pulled back beneath a scarf, her face tired but sharp with clarity. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 4 days before her death. "If you're watching this," she began, her voice steady, "then Richard tried to take what was never his. And I'm no longer around to stop him." She looked directly into the camera. I was not confused. I was not coerced. I made every change to my will with a clear mind and a full heart. Richard never loved my children. He tolerated them for what they represented, my loyalty, my resources, my name. I ignored the signs for too long. But when I learned of his plans, his attempt to sell our home, to enroll Emily in a state program, I knew I had to act. She paused, then continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Emily, if you're watching, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything in person. But I saw your strength. I knew you'd fight for them. For Lily. For Noah. Even when they didn't understand." Then her eyes narrowed. "Richard, if you're watching, you lost. I've given them the tools to finish what I started. And there is nothing you can do to take this from them now." The screen went black. I sat in stunned silence, the room thick with finality. Susan had left behind not just a will or a warning, but a living testament. A voice that couldn't be twisted or silenced. Mr. Green looked at me. "May I show this to the court?" Please, I whispered. That afternoon, I returned home and found Noah in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball against the fence. He didn't look up when I called his name. I need to show you something, I said. I don't want, it's from Mom. He froze. I brought the laptop outside and sat on the steps. I didn't push him. I just pressed play. He watched in silence. No movement. No breath. When the screen went dark, he sat down beside me slowly. His face was pale, his eyes red. She knew, he whispered. She knew everything. He covered his face with his hands. I believed him. I let him turn me against you. I said nothing. He said you wanted it all for yourself. That you didn't care about us. I looked at him. And now? He dropped his hands, looking at me fully for the first time in weeks. I was wrong. I nodded. Yeah. You were. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Not yet. But he didn't have to, not that day. That evening, for the first time in a long while, we ate dinner together at the same table. No yelling. No silence soaked in resentment. Just quiet, real quiet. The kind that comes after a storm. The video changed everything. Not just because it destroyed Richard's claims, but because it gave us back something we hadn't known we'd lost, Susan's voice. And with it, a part of ourselves. The days that followed the video felt like the aftermath of a long, bitter winter. The air was still heavy with memory, with pain, but there was space now, space to breathe, to speak, to begin again. Richard was gone. The court issued a restraining order after the video was submitted. He didn't challenge it. He didn't come back. It was as if the truth had finally stripped him of whatever power he thought he had left. And for the first time since Susan died, the house was quiet for the right reasons. But broken things don't heal overnight. Noah avoided me for 2 more days. He spent most of his time outside or in the garage, doing whatever he could to avoid conversation. I didn't press him. I didn't lecture. I knew guilt had to run its course before it could make room for something better. Lily, on the other hand, clung to me like a shadow. Her anxiety hadn't vanished, but the frequency of her panic attacks had dropped. She smiled more, spoke more, even asked to go back to school. I drove her myself that morning, and when she walked into the building without looking back, I sat in the car and cried for the first time in weeks. Not because I was afraid, but because hope finally felt real again. That night, Noah finally spoke. He stood in the doorway of my room, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. You were right, he said. I looked up from my notebook. About what? All of it. He walked in, sat on the floor, and leaned back against my bed. I thought I was protecting something by defending him, he said. Like if I believed in him hard enough, it would mean Susan hadn't made a mistake marrying him. That maybe things would go back to normal. I stayed quiet. But I see it now. I see what he did. What he tried to do. And I see what you did to stop it. He looked at me then. I'm sorry, Em. I didn't just turn on you. I abandoned Lily, too. I closed my notebook and joined him on the floor. I was angry, I said. But I never stopped wanting you to come back. His shoulders shook slightly. I put my arm around him, and for the first time in too long, he let me. The next day, we began setting up the house again, not just cleaning, but reclaiming it. We opened windows, moved furniture, donated the things Susan would have let go of. We found boxes of old pictures and spent an entire afternoon going through them in the living room. Lily laughed for the first time when she found a photo of Noah with braces and a terrible haircut. He rolled his eyes and called her a gremlin, and she called him Captain Anger, and I didn't stop them. Because they were acting like siblings again. One night, we lit a candle in the dining room and sat around it in silence. It wasn't about mourning, it was about remembering. About thanking Susan in the only way we could now, by not wasting what she gave us. I hung her journal on the wall in a shadow box frame. Not for display, but as a reminder. Not just of what we survived, but of who she was. Who she helped us become. The emancipation was finalized that week. I was now, legally and officially, my own guardian and the estate contact for Lily and Noah, under Mr. Green's oversight. The house was secure, the accounts protected. And for the first time, our future felt like something we could actually shape. Noah began talking about college again. Lily wanted to repaint her room. And I began to think, just think, about what I might want for myself. The healing wasn't complete. It wouldn't be for a long time. But the silence in the house was no longer filled with fear or secrets. It was filled with the sound of something slowly, carefully rebuilding. Us. The attic was warm with summer light, dust swirling in golden ribbons through the window as I sat cross-legged on the floor with Susan's journal once more in my hands. We had cleaned this space days ago, swept the corners, sorted boxes, opened old trunks. It felt less like a place of ghosts now and more like a memory archive, something sacred but not heavy. I hadn't opened the journal since the court hearing. Not because I was afraid, but because I had needed time to let the wounds scab over, to allow the silence between me and Noah to soften into peace, to watch Lily smile without looking over her shoulder. But today, I was ready. The final page was shorter than the others. A single paragraph in Susan's tidy handwriting, dated just a week before she passed. My greatest fear is not that I'll die, it's that the people I leave behind will be broken by someone who never saw them as family. I know Richard. He will act as if he is owed something. He will twist memories, manipulate pain, and call it parenting. That is why I did what I did, not to punish him, but to protect my children. I changed the will not out of anger, but out of love. And then the last line. A whisper through ink. If they are reading this, it means he failed. But I didn't. I closed the journal slowly, feeling the truth of those words settle in my chest like a stone, but not a heavy one. A grounding one. Susan's plan had worked. Richard's plan had unraveled piece by piece until nothing remained but silence and absence. No more threats. No more control. He had tried to reduce us to paperwork and loopholes, but she had given us something that couldn't be manipulated: trust, foresight, and proof. He failed. And because of her, we didn't. Lily sat cross-legged beside me, flipping through a photo album. She had chosen light blue paint for her room and started a scrapbook filled with her own drawings and poems. She still had bad days, nights when the shadows felt too long, but she no longer woke up crying. Noah was applying for early college programs. He had taken over the backyard garden, reviving it from weeds and turning it into something green and alive. We still argued sometimes, but we also talked, really talked. About Mom. About the past. About how guilt doesn't have to be a prison. And me? I was learning how to breathe again. Not just because I had the title of legal guardian, or because the court had sided with me, but because I had found something stronger than paperwork and planning. I had found the truth. And truth, it turns out, is a quiet kind of armor. The house didn't feel like Susan's anymore. Not completely. It felt like ours. Every repaired crack in the wall, every photo rehung, every dinner cooked in the kitchen where we once whispered instead of laughed, it was ours now. There was no dramatic ending. No final confrontation. No fire or collapse. Just life. Resumed. One evening, I walked into the living room and saw Lily asleep on the couch, her head resting on Noah's shoulder while they watched an old movie Susan used to love. The dog snored beside them. The windows were open. The air smelled like lavender. I stood there for a while, not saying anything. Then I walked upstairs, opened the journal, and placed it back in its box. Her words had done enough. Now it was time for ours.